Kenny Reischmann here for North Avenue Nation, and the Westchester County Executive Race cut right through Iona today, and New Rochelle Mayor Noam Bramson addressed the Iona community.
When you have a set of beliefs, you have an obligation to work for them and fight for them. And this process is the means by which we look at each other as citizens, and we look at ourselves in the mirror, and we decide what are our responsibilities to each other.
You mentioned really quickly the policy of having towns and gowns come together. How do you propose to do that?
Well, I think we actually have a great model in what we've accomplished in New Rochelle. A couple of years ago, we faced a real challenge. Iona has and still has a legitimate need to expand its residential population, to construct student housing, and we experienced very significant pushback from neighborhoods who also have legitimate concerns about impacts on their quality of life. So we established a college community city committee that worked in a collaborative way over a period of many months, had some bumps in the road certainly as they wrestled with some of the difficult choices, but in the end was able to come up with a common recommendation for how we can change the land use regulations in the immediately surrounding area and have a pattern of growth that serves everybody's interests. So I think that kind of inclusive collaborative style, provided people are willing to be open-minded and really think through choices and be respectful of the point of view and interests of the other side, I think that can make a big difference, and this process here in New Rochelle proves it.
Now, what you mentioned at the end there was basically what you mentioned in your speech about people coming together and hyper-partisanship. And how do you see that going? Do you see that a lot in local politics, or is it just really on the federal level?
Well, I think it's much more evident on the federal level, and I think we have to do our part to make sure that that hyperpartisanship does not infect our local and regional politics. We want to be respectful of each other's point of view, recognize that it ought to be possible to disagree with each other without demonizing each other, and move on from one issue to the next. And we've had in Westchester a moderate mainstream tradition for most of our modern history. And I think that's important in recognizing that the real test of our leadership is the impact on families and communities, and not just scoring partisan points.
And like you said, we have to make sure that it doesn't infect us at the local level. So how do we make sure that students in college aren't as cynical as you mentioned in your speech?
Well, I think that requires a sense of responsibility on the part of students themselves, as well as an effort on the part of those of us who are involved in public service now to set a good example. So taking the time to really focus on the consequences of choices, the consequences of actions, and to recognize the role that each of us can play in whatever role we occupy to improve lives for not just ourselves but our neighbors, I think that's the essence of what it means to be a good citizen. And the more we remind ourselves of that truth, the better off we will be.
Bramson has his work cut out for him as he tries to defeat Republican incumbent Rob Astorino as the mudslinging intensifies in this race for county executive. For North Avenue Nation, I'm Kenny Reischmann.